Welcome to Business Talk Sister Gawk. I'm Bekkah, and today's podcast episode is What is Offshoring and Nearshoring? And I wanted to do an episode on this because over the years, I have seen the ebb and flow of like the dot-com boom and how it's opened up the world. And I have been experimenting with like offshore and nearshoring and what does that look like for international business? Because I've done consulting work myself in the international space. And I wanted to get the perspective of someone who's in the industry that is doing this regularly and has a lot of experience. So with me today, I have Brian Samson. Thank you so much for being with me.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and I am super excited because Brian, just so you know, has built three different nearshoring companies from like startup all the way to like $4 million in revenue. And he's worked internationally for quite some time. You're out of San Francisco, right?
Actually, Hawaii, but I did live in San Francisco for about 5 years.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to make sure that I know exactly where you are. And I know like we've been struggling with a little time difference here. So I'm really excited to have you to talk about this. So can you first tell me like what exactly do you do?
Yeah, so I've been in this space for 10 years now, and that's really
That's a long
look,
time, honestly.
yeah, yeah, and I feel like I'm just getting started. Like I've every year I get more passionate and excited about this world, and I think that's a good thing. We as entrepreneurs, we often, kind of get burned out about our industry or our business, but I feel really fortunate, that I just kind of get excited to share the stories and anecdotes of this world. But what I do in a nutshell is look at me as like a talent broker connecting the world of talent in Latin America with US companies.
Okay. So that poses the question then, what exactly is nearshoring?
Yeah, I think to understand nearshoring, it's important to have a reference point. And probably the more commonly searched term and just the more common part of our vernacular is offshoring.
Hmm.
So what is offshoring? Um, in the general sense, there's an ocean between the talent markets.
Hmm.
And if you're US based, I don't know if your listeners are mostly US based, but we tend to get like ethnocentric and think the world revolves around us. Um, for us, offshoring means we're leveraging talent in Asia. And that could be like India, Vietnam, China, Philippines, countries like that. But if you're in the US, you're nearshoring, so you're not jumping over an ocean if you're working with Latin America. Nearshoring effectively means the same time zone. But it can also, these terms work no matter where you are in the world. So let's say you're in Australia, you might nearshore to the Philippines because you're on a similar time zone.
Mm-hmm.
But you might offshore to Latin America, right? Because it's on the other side of the world. And one more thing that I'll add is it's often developed countries working with developing countries. So in the case of like Australia or say even Singapore, these are developed countries and they're tapping into countries that are, up and coming, but maybe costs haven't quite caught up yet. So there's often, an energetic labor market, educated, um, eager to make their mark, but there's a cost arbitrage there. And you'll see that, with the US and Latin America. You'll see that in other markets, say like UK with Eastern Europe. So it's a way to, I guess, leverage this concept of the world is flat, and we can access great talent everywhere, where maybe 30 years ago, you were really only able to tap into the talent in your own city.
So tell me what you mean about that like labor arbitrage.
Yeah, it's a word that we use in the industry to really denote value, value over the price you pay. So in the case of Latin America,
Mm-hmm.
our clients that we work with and just, people in general that I've talked to that have nearshored, they've been really impressed with the talent level. So they kind of feel like they're getting this secret advantage, in a way. Like, wow, I'm paying this much, but I feel like I'm getting way more value than what I'm paying. So, therein lies the arbitrage.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe let me put this in like a math problem because, you might have more math-oriented listeners. And let's say that, on a scale of 1 to 100, with 100 being the most talented person ever for this role, um, maybe you're a San Francisco tech company and your cost for this person, might be 100 on the cost level because it's expensive to hire talent there. But the skill is also 100. So they're kind of maxing out on both, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's say Latin America, the cost might only be a 40 because it's 40% of what you might pay somebody in San Francisco, but the skill set might be an 80. So it's not quite 100, um, but you're getting 80 and paying 40 in a way. And I think that's what people really appreciate and gets them excited as they build their team. And that's how they see labor arbitrage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I think about this, like my first reaction, is that a lot of people that I have worked with in the past are like, well, I don't trust like doing anything internationally, or that's taking away jobs. And like for me, when I started my career in like working in digital marketing and looking at all these different things that were happening in the industry, I started seeing, especially social media managers, were getting paid less and less and less and less. And it was like, maybe you could have gotten paid like $20 an hour and it was down to 13. Or then now it's like people, there was no advancement in their career. They couldn't like level up to the next
Yeah.
thing because all of a sudden, all of these other places in the world, like the Philippines and the Argentina and everything, they're offering those social media services for like $4 an hour or $6. And all of a sudden, it's like there's no future for somebody to do that unless they're doing way more strategy and development than just
Mm,
posting the stuff. Do you know what I'm saying? And
yeah.
so, like, even today, when you talk to a small business owner, for me, it's like when I talk to them about social media, they're like, I really want help with social media, but I can't afford to pay somebody this rate to do it. And that's what's necessary for the cost of living in the United States to offer that as a service. And small business owners just can't afford it for the price that's being out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the larger issue right on the head in that nearly every business, that's not like a, Fortune 500 company is capital constrained,
Mm-hmm.
and most small businesses, the founder is using his or her own money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you can only go as far as your own capital, or maybe you get a small bank loan or, maybe in very rare cases you might have an investor, but there's always capital constraints. So you're always looking for the best ROI, the best internal rate of return. And there's an enormous amount of highly talented people in the US. But in my mind, I think it's a good thing when you know that you're competing on the world stage because it kind of forces everyone to continue to level up. Without competition, I think we stagnate. So I think competition's good for everybody. And I've seen a lot of talent in the US get way better, not only because in their case they're able to leverage nearshore and offshore resources for maybe some of the lower level tasks, um,
Mm-hmm.
but it also just kind of keeps them going, keeps them learning. There's always new stuff, with AI and whatever. I mean, wow, like I've been in the tech industry for 20 years and COBOL was like something I recruited on, 20 years ago. now it's AI and data engineers. There's always new stuff. There's always new stuff for social media, which by the way, like wasn't even around, when I started my career. Um, so video editing, things like that. There's always new tools, new things. So I think it creates a competitive landscape that's better for everybody.
Mm. Well, and I think what you said was super valuable about like the skill set in the US per se is that that's 100 level, and then you have someone in a developing nation that maybe is going to match it at an 80% level, but still your price point may potentially be a better fit for what your costs afford. And so I just think that's super interesting. But why did you get started in this?
Yeah, this goes back to like late 2015. So I had
Okay.
been working as a head of talent for tech startups in San
Okay.
Francisco. And that's like a very San Francisco-ish type title, Really, I was,
Okay.
I was just, I was just in charge of recruiting for some startups, and what typically happens is they get a big check from an investor. I'm probably already there at the company, hiring a couple people here and there, kind of getting the strategy going. And then all of a sudden, you get a check for $20 million from your investors, and it's go, go, go. We got to hire. So, from like a flat-footed position, I'd have to hire, like 30 software developers, like boom, boom, boom. And it's competitive and hard and, so forth. But while I was in that world, I'm from the Midwest originally, just outside of Chicago.
Okay.
And when I first arrived in San Francisco, I felt so intimidated, so just like overwhelmed. Like, wow, everybody's got a degree from Stanford or Berkeley or Caltech. And, it's like, the movie The Beautiful Mind, everybody's doing like, everyone just felt like so much smarter than me. But after a few years, I think I developed more confidence. So that led me to wanting to play founder, myself. And I saw a thesis in the market in the fintech world. So fintech, for those that aren't familiar, it's like the next generation of financial technology companies. And they usually have a very specific focus, like
Hmm.
lending or investing, where like if you're Wells Fargo, you kind of do everything okay, or Bank of America, you kind of do everything, but you just do it at an okay level.
Hmm.
So that leaves the landscape open for um, uh, fintech companies to pick a very specific lane and do it really well.
Mm.
So, so I raised about $2 million from an investor, based on this thesis of we would build the minimum viable product for fintech companies because they had a great product vision, lots of capital. We're kind of agnostic, maybe even apathetic to the technology and how it was built. So, we could do this. So we put sales in San Francisco, and with my $2 million, I didn't think that would get us very far in a place like San Francisco. So I started, looking around and remembered a backpacking trip that I took a few years prior and kind of threw a dart on Argentina. Uh,
So you went on a backpacking trip to Argentina, is that what you're saying?
yeah, so back in 2012, I did a
Okay.
backpacking trip there. And then I remembered that, 3 years later in 2015, like, hey, I think that'd be a good place to build a company from. So my wife and I were married, but no kids yet. And I came home one day and I said, hey, good news. We got the investment, and I think we should move to Argentina. And
What?
she's
I
like,
could just
oh,
imagine that conversation.
yeah. She's like,
Okay.
well, wait, remind me again where it is on the map, And um, So we, kind of did like a one-way trip there and stayed for about a year. And since then, I've been there 9 times. Um, but anyway, that was kind of my first foray into nearshoring. And the goal with that company was to build a whole engineering team. We ended up growing that to about 80 software engineers, had a nice office and leaders and an organized payroll and all that stuff. But that was the very first push into that world.
Okay, so you mentioned something that I just want to clarify. So when you said you saw a thesis, what you mean by that is you saw an opportunity that you built a model of what you thought could work based on where you saw the opportunity, or what?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was my thesis, and then basically got an investor to fund that thesis.
Okay, cool. All right. So that's kind of how you got started. So how did you do that? Like, how do you do what you do with nearshoring?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. In that first business that I had, which is still around, I just ended up selling my shares after I settled in Hawaii, and there is really no easy way to get from Hawaii to Argentina.
I'm
You
sure
had
the flights are very limited.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot of layovers, a lot of stops. You're really on the other side of the world, and I can't be away from my two young kids for that long. So, um, but how it all works is in that specific company, we kind of went all in on Argentina entities, payroll, legal. We had meat is a big part of the culture there, so we had our own like large grill on the patio area of the office. So, sliding door opens and you've got this outdoor space, and every
Mm-hmm.
Friday night, we're cooking like just pounds and pounds of meat, for the team. Um, so, really, really just fun atmosphere and environment. And then as I started to continue in that world of nearshoring, I saw that, there's more than one way to kind of skin the cat, and people want different things. So I realized some of the limitations of the business that I had, and that we were mandating in the office. Now, this is pre-COVID too, but we were, mandated office 5 days a week because, you're trying to build your culture. And
Mm-hmm.
we all thought that was really important back in 2019. And then we wanted, this whole layer of management. We worked in local currency. So, we're constantly like analyzing the volatility of the peso in Argentina versus the US dollar. And
Mm-hmm.
are we up this month or down this month? Um, and back to like all the layers in between. So we would have these like mid-level engineers doing the work, but the client we were building for is dealing with like our managers and architects and directors and people like that. So sometimes there's bias that goes into it. So when I built Plug, which is the business that I have today, we're about 90 team members,
Okay.
and it's different in kind of all those things we talked about. Everybody works from their own home office. We got rid of all the currency craziness, and we just pay in US dollars. And everyone just works directly. They know the client. It's almost like an embedded team member model. Everybody like the client, there might be an engineering manager or leader, and our engineers in Mexico and Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, wherever, they all feel like they're part of the team. They get direction from the client rather than us. They feel like they're, part of that mission, part of the vision. building the products for that customer. Um, but whether it was the first company or Plug, the core element is having the right infrastructure, uh, excuse me, having the right infrastructure in Latin America, having the recruiters, having the ability to identify the different talent pockets, having the understanding of getting computers and hardware in and out of the country. These all are different constraints around customs, and a variety of other factors. Even take like Costa Rica versus Nicaragua. These are neighboring countries, but one is rich, one is not. Costa Rica is a wealthy, developed, safe country. Nicaragua is cheaper, more volatile. Um, so if you are looking for a bargain, maybe you'll pick Nicaragua for your talent. If you're looking for stability, you might pick Costa Rica, but there's like a tax you're essentially paying for the stability. And that holds true if you're in Asia. Singapore and Malaysia are neighbors. Singapore is rich and expensive. Malaysia isn't, but
Mm-hmm.
one is super stable, one isn't. So it all depends, what you're trying to optimize for as a customer.
Yeah. So let me just ask you this too, when you say like computers and customs and stuff. So you're hiring the talent and then you're providing them with the equipment to make sure they can do the job and matching them with customers that it's the right fit. Is that what you're doing?
That's exactly right.
Okay. So, yeah, I have like so many more questions, but
Hmm.
I know that we have two episodes together. So, the next episode, we're talking about how to leverage nearshoring for your business. But what resources would you recommend to someone who is looking to do this?
Yeah, so I think there's levels to business, and I'm sure your listeners appreciate this. When you're just starting out, I don't think a recruiting agency is quite the right place to start.
Okay.
Because it can get expensive, and I want to make sure your listeners are using the right places. So I would do DIY, do it yourself. And Fiverr is a great resource. Upwork is a great resource. Now they have issues and constraints later, which is where, we might come into play. But if you've never hired anybody from outside the country, I would start there
Mm-hmm.
and uh, do the exact same interview process you would if you were hiring somebody in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you do like a kind of like a case study type interview and a behavioral type interview, you want to make sure that you get it right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, kind of like a test project. And it also gives you a chance to kind of see like what do you get for the money? Like a $14 an hour person versus a $9 an hour person, $5 an hour. Is the difference, are you getting the arbitrage? Are you getting, significantly more value than what you're paying for? And like what's possible out there. But long answer to your question, I would really start there. And then once you're ready, for like your third, fourth person, that's where I would start looking at recruiting agencies because then they can start to help you optimize for more things and help you uh, see things that maybe you wouldn't have access to because a lot of the talent isn't on Upwork and Fiverr, but there's enough talent to get you started there.
Okay. Yeah. And so how can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Please go to Plug Technologies, and that's plug with two G's, PLUGG .tech, TECH. That's our website. We've got all sorts of resources there, country guides, case studies, podcast episodes, tons of resources and opportunities for people to learn about this world. And then you're free to message me directly as well from the website.
Yeah. And what is the name of your podcast?
It's called the Nearshore Cafe Podcast.
Okay. And that's available on like Apple and Spotify,
Yeah,
etc.
Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Yep, we're about 75 episodes.
Okay, awesome. And so for the Gawk portion of this episode, I am excited to talk to you about this because I think it's something near and dear to your heart. So if you didn't know this, Brian is a foster and adoptive parent. And I'm pretty passionate about that subject for some of you who've been listening to my show for a while. But tell me a little bit about why you guys got into that and what your experience was.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. As you mentioned, it's something I care deeply about. But to be totally honest with you, 5, 6 years ago, I knew nothing about this world. I had never really met anybody that had fostered before. It wasn't part of anything that I knew growing up.
Okay.
Uh, so we were in Hawaii, which we've lived here for almost 8 years now. And in 2019, we had our son biologically. And then in early 2020, kind of right before COVID, it was like February of 2020, we had someone give a presentation at our church.
Okay.
And she's from like one of the local foster organizations, and she kind of starts talking like big picture. There's 440,000 children in the foster system. Hawaii has a couple thousand itself, and
Hmm.
um, and then I just start like thinking of just like, wow, this is really rough. Years and years ago, I was a big brother in the Big Brother Big Sisters program, and there's something about like the innocence of kids, where like they don't have agency yet. They're not making decisions. They haven't chosen anything about the life that they were landed in. And
Hmm.
I was pretty fortunate. I just grew up in like a nice, stable Midwest home with two parents and a couple brothers, and um, I just got lucky, but so many of these kids didn't, just out of and they're just so innocent. So anyway, my wife and I are, listening to the presentation, and I can tell that it's kind of hitting her too. Those like Jinx, buy me a Coke type moments.
Yeah.
We
Hmm.
we both kind of like turned, looked at each other, like just as we got the car started, like we got to do this. We both kind of said it to each other at the same time. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like I go to church, but I've never had like a moment like I've been called, like I've never kind of I respect people that have, but like that was never really happened in my experience. But I kind of feel like that was the like like that moment for me. And we were talking in the car ride, like if not us, then who's gonna do it? We have the time, we have the resources. So we were kind of off to the races, and then COVID hit. So licensing was a little bit slow. Like we're, doing a lot of online training instead of in person. We're this is, the period of, everyone's all masked up and special appointments only to do things, but we got our fingerprints and everything. And then finally in October the year, so it took like 7 months or so to get licensed. But finally in October, congratulations, you're licensed. And I remember we kind of had this like wide range of kids, that like we were kind of open, on ages like 0 to 14, essentially. So, kind of like a funny aside, I remember like this like really goofy experience I had at a mattress store here in Hawaii. Like I went in and because I wanted to get the house ready, and I told the salesperson, yeah, I need like a kid's bed. And they're like, "Well, how old is your kid?" And I was
I have
like,
no idea. Yeah.
"I don't know." Yeah.
I totally can relate to this. Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, and then eventually we started getting calls, and the foster system here was good about like we might have a kid, here's the situation, kind of get ready. And there were a couple like we knew the kid's name, we were ready, and then maybe a family member stepped in. But it was weird. It was wild. Like every
Hmm.
time the phone rang, we're kind of ready. Like, is this it? Is this it?
Oh,
Um,
I know that feeling. I remember when we first started, it was like, I think that we got licensed and within 24 hours we had our first placement. It was like, and
wow.
we're coming in 3 hours. Hope you could throw everything together. And we were like, ah, okay.
Yeah, I mean that's it's awesome that you've done this. Yeah, so finally February, it was just like 2 days before my birthday. So it was like a great birthday present. We had this little 6-month girl that was placed in our care, and broke our heart when we saw her because she was, dirty, and we learned like no prenatal care, and born with, drugs in her system, and uh dirty bottle, and 6-month-year-old baby, and she's kind of been subsisting on like apple juice and stuff, and like, wow, this is rough, but it wasn't the easiest first couple months kind of getting her settled in, but
Hmm.
we ended up officially adopting her almost 2 years later.
Mm.
And it's she's ours. She's got this big bright smile, and giggle, and a big personality, and we couldn't imagine life without her.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that story. I loved it. And I am really excited to do another episode with you next week. If you enjoyed this episode, you should give it a review on wherever you are listening and join us next week.